Hey everyone, God bless you. Welcome to Danny and the Lion's Den. If this is your first time on this channel, I'm really glad to be able to have you. So I want to talk about, let's just jump right into it. I want to talk about what we've been seeing as breaking news, where the Taliban have taken over Kabul. And I want to go into a little bit of history. I want to talk about how I'm seeing some of these things in connection with biblical prophecy and of course, some of the truth behind some of the things that we're seeing here. So I'm going to just go through and show you some articles and we'll talk through this, okay? So the first thing I see, violence erupts at Kabul airport as Afghans try to flee the Taliban. So there have apparently been these people trying to evacuate. This has been a 20-year conflict. We're going to talk about, well, 20-year war, essentially, that the U.S. has been involved in Afghanistan starting in 2001, right, when we saw the attack on 9/11, which those of us here in the truth community, we know the truth about that. There have been several different theories as to why we went into, well, Iraq in the first place, which had no connection to the people who were, I guess, blamed for having done this. And I use these words carefully because, again, we know the truth behind some of these events, especially the things with 9/11 and our own government's involvement in that. And so we're going to talk a little bit about Afghanistan here, but we've seen there have been footage apparently of there were the airports being, it was chaotic. There's all these people trying to escape. And there have been apparently the planes that were taking off. Most of the planes were grounded, the commercial airplanes, but that there were airplanes that were, military planes that you see people kind of hanging on the side of them as they're trying to take off and kind of falling and just falling to their deaths. And so there's a lot of chaos as we're seeing on the news as of today. So I want to just talk to you quickly. One thing that I thought that was really strange, just in hearing this story, is the Taliban that we're seeing in the streets, that it's peaceful, right? Like, you're not even seeing people shooting anything. There's not, like, the Taliban, you see there's images of them just kind of walking, like there's nothing happening. It's almost like, okay, come in, open doors, do what you want to do, go ahead, which also makes me ask and question, like, this looks like something that could be staged, right? Like, you just allow me to come right in. Now, keep in mind, again, this is your first time on this channel. I do strongly believe in the narrative, that there is a narrative that is often pushed, especially through mainstream media sources. But I do also know that there are impacts on people, right? That there are very real impacts, so that there are negative impacts on the Afghani people and those who would be impacted by a regime such as this. And so, to the elites of the world, they're nothing more than pawns and looked at as chattel, where they're disposable, right? Like, people's lives are disposable according to the elite. So all of this just being a game for them doesn't matter, and that there are people who I'm sure will be severely negatively impacted, and there will be deaths from this, but that it's, for them, the ends justify the means, right? Okay, so this is that order ab cow, order out of chaos. And so I thought it was interesting that it was just pretty much like clean sweep. Everything was pretty much open. It was simple. It was like the president even just said, "Oh, to avoid bloodshed, I'm just going to step down," as if that wasn't something. Like, there's no attempt to deploy any military. Apparently, the Afghanistan's military, which had been being trained by the United States military, had failed. But again, all of this is just very much kind of goes back and forth, right? Because if we look even at the history of the Taliban, how they came to be, we're going to talk about that because that plays a significant impact. Before we get there, it kind of reminded me of the very much, staged attack on the U.S. Capitol. All the world's a stage, right? Where they were just let in. There was no, it's the same thing here to the country and into the president's chambers. You'll see, I'll show you an image of that, where they're just kind of walked right in, like there's no fight. whatsoever. So this kind of reminded me of this situation where you kind of just see people walking around, like taking pictures, like, hey, we're here. Like, so it's very similar. Same writers, I guess, right? Uh, but let's talk about this a little bit. So, when we talk about the Taliban and the US's involvement, like this went back to the Soviet Union during the Cold War, when the Soviet Union was stationed and they're in Afghanistan. And this was a way to indirectly fight the US, to indirectly fight with the Soviet Union at the time during the Cold War. And so the US thought it was a great idea to go and to help to train and to equip with weapons, military grade weapons, the group known as the Mujahideen. Now, the Mujahideen is basically a word that means those who engage in jihad. And in case you don't know what jihad is a struggle or fight against the enemies of Islam. So anybody who does not ascribe to Islam, they are basically the enemy, right? So those who fight against. Now, you would think, right, anybody who did a little bit of research or maybe took a class in religion in college could probably know this was a terrible idea. But again, all the world's a stage, right? All of these things for the elite is a long-term thought process. It's not just one, they're not just looking 5 years or a year ahead. They're looking at the end goal, the end game, and the Hegelian dialectics that need to be at play in order to bring you to that place. Okay, so now out of the Mujahideen, they were basically, like I said, the involvement with the U.S. And then eventually the Soviets pull out of Afghanistan. Okay, and then later on you have a group. I'm just trying to see if I don't think that, yeah, Afghan Arabs. I'm not sure if this goes into. Yeah, this doesn't go into the Taliban. Okay, so give me one moment. So this one tells us a little bit more. You can see about like who are the Taliban in case you don't know. Now, for those of you in my generation, one of the earliest quote unquote traumas that our generation, I guess, subconsciously was supposed to be imprinted in us was this, right? Like we all remember where we were on 9/11. I was in class. My mom picked me up, right? Like I was in like maybe first grade. Maybe no, second grade actually. Yeah, I was in second grade, and so all we knew, right, was about the war in Afghanistan. We knew about jihad. We heard about Islam or Islamic radicals, right? So this has been something that has been ingrained within our generation. And so I find it funny that 20 years later, we're going to make some connection as to how this is coming back. But the Taliban, it says, were removed from power in Afghanistan by US-led forces in 2001, but the group has been on the offensive in recent months and is now on the brink of seizing power again. Okay, so that's pretty much the story there. Now, Taliban means students in the Pashto language, emerged in the early 1990s in the northern Pakistan following the withdrawal of the Soviet troops from Afghanistan. So once the Soviets pulled out after having the US's involvement with the Mujahideen, you see the Taliban rising up, right? Now, people can say that there's not a connection between the two, but then that would be crazy because obviously the Mujahideen and the Taliban, they have the same goal, which is to bring forward radical Islam, to have a theocratic nation under the nation of Islamic rule and Islamic law under Sharia law. Now, if you look at this, okay, it says mostly paid for by money from Saudi Arabia, which preached a hardline form of Sunni Islam. Now, my biggest issue, which again, people don't, they're just in their little bubbles of confusion, I guess, but why we even do any kind of trading with Saudi Arabia is a whole other story. But we will talk about Saudi Arabia themselves and talk about the impact that their country has and why they would support something like the Taliban, okay? Because they have very similar ideologies. Now, this is why when we talk about bringing troops, like we're going to show you about how George Bush bringing in the troops and keeping them there in order to set up a democracy is the story, that's the narrative, but it doesn't work, right? Because you're fighting ideologies. You're not dealing with, oh, how many of them can we kill? You're talking about teaching, right? You're talking about thought process. This is why the Bible tells us to be renewed in our minds, right? We need to have relationship with God, because if we don't have that relationship with God and our minds are not renewed, then we're going to destroy ourselves, because that is human nature. That is the flesh. But here's this image here, just of the Taliban leaders just kind of sitting in the office, like, oh, the president's like, I'm out to avoid bloodshed. Okay, no, you were told time to step down. Here we go. This is all part of the stage, right? Everything in their timing. I thought this was interesting. Now, I tried to look up what this was. If those of you, I have never seen this artwork before, but I'm sure it has some significance, because anything that the mainstream media news is going to put out, especially with an image like this. But I thought this was interesting. Interesting. It almost looked like there was like a crowning happening there, kind of like a passing of power, which I thought was really interesting considering this image here. So if anybody actually knows, any kind of like Arabic art, or you're familiar with that art history, please tell me if you know what this is, because I've been trying to figure it out, because I'm sure it has some type of significant meaning as to why that would be front and center in this picture. Um, so, but that was the image of them there. So I want to talk about this, because this is super important just to understand what's happening in the world stage. So you have and some of the relations and where this is leading to. Okay. So we have, after 9/11, the US forces decided to invade Iraq. Why Iraq? There are lots of theories as to why. Some who, follow the idea about hidden history and giants, right? Some believe that one of the reasons that we went there in the first place was because there were some things that would have shown the validity of the Bible. And of course, we also know the Roman Catholic Church. We know the Vatican. We know that their role to play in hiding or the manipulation of history in order to fit the narrative. That there's lots of evidence of things that are biblically true, and so that is one theory. Of course, there's also the world stage answer, right? We went for oil. We also went for this, and we're going for protection, and because they bombed us, right? Like, you have that story as well. But of course, there's other means as to why. And so Afghanistan is actually all the way over here, right? And you have Pakistan. Okay, so Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now, the biggest concern that we should have, and how we're going to see this relating to prophecy, is we see Iran is here, and we have Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia actually had been responsible, we just read, for directly funding the rise of the Taliban. Okay. Now, Saudi Arabia does a lot of work on the international stage, especially with things like AI and other kinds of developments, and especially known for their oil. Right, it's a very wealthy nation. It's actually one of the wealthiest nations that there are, because of its global influence in terms of resource. Okay, but the problem is that they also very much have a very strict Sharia law, but you don't hear about a lot of this in the news. Of course, this is not covered, but they do follow Sharia law. Well, which basically means, right, you can be crucified in a public square. If you steal something, your hand can get chopped off. There are, like, you can be whipped and publicly lashed, kind of like the days of Jesus, right? And what we have seen happen is, throughout this time period, you see Afghanistan, for example, even though during that 20 years from 2001 until today, where the US military was there in order to, right, create a democracy, they're there for what they're supposed to be there for, that purpose, for the world stage long term. But that's the narrative, right? To create a democracy, to give rights to women, to do all these things, which are wonderful things if that was true. But you had seen some progress. So people were saying, we don't want the troops there, we want them to come home. But if there was a hasty pullout, then what would have ended up happening was that what you see now happening, right? Okay. So the biggest issue is that there was a parallel government taking place. Now, the same way that you think about the Sanhedrin during Jesus's time, and then you had Roman law. So you have this theocratic law, which went based on the religious belief, and then you had the law of the land, or the governmental, I guess, secular law. Now, this is all connected to what you're going to see happening later on. Whereas places like Saudi Arabia, their law, the law of the land, is the theocratic, is the religious law. Now, this was similar to what you saw with Jesus, but like I said, it was a parallel. They were happening simultaneously with one another. That's why you went back and forth between authorities and who was going to deal with this one blaspheming and blah, blah, right? Okay. So That's what's going to be led up to later on when we talked about the law, the theocratic law, which would eventually lead to the persecution of Christians. I have another video on that, that you'll be able to see where this parallel law is at play. Okay, where you see things like this allowed. But the biggest concern is now what we're starting to see is when we talk about Israel biblically, the Bible tells us many times about the aggressions that will take place and the nations to begin to surround Israel for the eventual um, attack on Israel. Okay, and these are all leading up to end times events. So if you take a look, right, we do know already that places like Syria, Jordan, right, there's a lot of conflict, the Gaza Strip, there's been war in these areas for quite a bit of time. Now, the problem then becomes you have places like Turkey. Turkey does not have good relations with the United States. We're going to talk a little bit about that very briefly. Iraq, we know the issues there with Iraq. Iran with the nuclear missile crisis, knowing that they have nuclear weapons and they are not friends with the U.S. But Turkey, Iran. Then you have places like Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, all of a unified mind. Now, when we talk about a unified mind, is that their goal, right, in some of the ideology of these majority Muslim nations that follow Sharia law, is this idea of jihad in order to come against the enemies of Islam. That's important to understand because in the Bible, I believe it's in Revelation. I actually didn't have this pulled up, but thank you, Lord. I feel like I'm getting this now. It does talk about how there will be, basically, when you think of the sons of Ishmael, right? Like we see that the split back with Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael, that these sons, these people that come from this other line, that eventually that they will be right, they will rise up and they will be of one mind. Okay, and that unifying power is what is going to help to lead to this eventual attack, where you're going to see this attack happening on the world stage, but specifically towards Israel. So I'm not going to get into too much detail. You can go into this to keep the video short, but we talk about it started with George Bush declaring Iran part of an axis of evil. So we know that the US and Iran do not have good relations, and this started on 9/11. They have a longer history, like we can go all the way back, but that's the more recent stuff. There was then we had that nuclear threat with Iran. A nuclear deal is signed, but then Trump takes office, right? And there was the whole like quote unquote Muslim ban. So all of these things were meant to take part in conjunction, going back and forth between traumas with what we're seeing happening surrounding. I don't even know if this word still triggers the algorithm anymore, but you know the virus and such, right? Okay. So, in April, the US labels RIGC a terrorist organization. So now they're actually saying the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps, their military institution, is a terrorist organization. Okay, so this idea with terrorism. All right. And then Iran reduces commitments to nuclear deal in June. And then in December, the US strikes facilities in Iraq and Syria. And then in January, the US kills an Iran response. So now we're already starting to see more tensions rising. And then Iran says, we're going to reduce that commitment to that deal. So they have nuclear weapons. And then we also see that they're good friends with Turkey. And as you saw on the map, where how these things kind of connect with one another. Um, Let me see, where'd it go? Here we go. Sorry. And you can see on the world stage how all of this is playing out, right? And now we're seeing what happens in Afghanistan. It's more support of the surrounding areas. Okay. Same thing with Turkey. We're not going to go into too much detail about their relations. But again, Turkey being an aggressor, thinking about Armenia, even the Armenian Genocide, which we do know that this is very specific also to those Christians and people, again, who do not ascribe to the Islamic belief. So the point on a Christian standpoint is that we need to be in prayer for our brothers and sisters, missionaries, pastors, and other ministers that are overseas, that are there during these times of instability. But on the other end, right, we need to talk about the legal system. And as I was saying, of Saudi Arabia, which is based on Sharia law, and you're going to see a lot of this start to come to be. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about what exactly happens This is something, it's an interesting read if you want to go a little deeper. I will link these articles and things below for you to take a look at yourself. But how is all of this kind of leading up to each other? Well, in Ezekiel 38, I asked the Lord, I was praying last night, and I'm like, Lord, um, what is this? What role does this have to play? And instantly in my spirit, I received Ezekiel 38, which has Gog and allies attack Israel. This is all leading up to where we see the war of Gog and Magog. And so, again, this is something that you can go and you can read yourself. um, but I'll go ahead and read. I'm going to read a little bit to you, starting in verse 7, which says, Prepare yourself and be ready, you and all your companies that are gathered about you, and be a guard for them. After many days, you'll be visited. In the latter years, you will come into the land of those brought back from the sword and gathered from many people on the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They were brought out of the nations, and now all of them dwell safely. You will ascend, coming like a storm, covering the land like a cloud, you and all your troops and many peoples with you. Thus says the Lord God, on that day it shall come to pass that thoughts will arise in your mind, and you will make an evil plan. You will say, I will go up against a land of unwalled villages. I will go to a peaceful people who dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates, to take plunder and to take booty, to stretch out your hand against the waste places that are again inhabited, and against a people gathered from the nations, who have acquired livestock and goods, who dwell in the midst of the land. Sheba, Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish, and all their young lions will say to you, Have you come to take plunder? Have you gathered your army to take booty, to carry away silver and gold, and to take away livestock and goods, to take great plunder? Therefore, Son of man, prophesy and say to Gog, Thus says the Lord God, on the day when my people Israel dwells safely, will you not know it? Then you will come from your place out of the far north, you and many peoples with you, all of them riding on horses, a great company and a mighty army. You will come up against my people Israel like a cloud to cover the land. It will be in the latter days that I will bring you against my land, so that the nations may know me, when I am hallowed in you, O Gog, before their eyes. Thus says the Lord God, Are you he of whom I have spoken in former days by my servants, the prophets of Israel, who prophesied for those, or for years in those days, that I would bring you against them? Okay, so the Bible talks about how there will be this rise, and these again, a unified mind will come against Israel. And again, everything is going to be, you're going to see that the Lord eventually does come back in order to defend Israel. This happens. This happens later, okay? But this is where you see Gog and Magog taking place. Now, um, I was going to go into Osama bin Laden. I'm not going to go into that. Again, these are all the things people call quote unquote conspiracies, but it just goes deeper into the kind of the rabbit hole if you want to go this direction about how, even where he came from and how he ended up being the scapegoat for 9/11. And he wasn't found, I think, until 2011, right? Which is pretty interesting. It was 10 years after, 10 years later, 2001 happens. Twin Towers fall, 2011, find Osama bin Laden, and then his body is just thrown into the ocean, right? He's buried, quote unquote, in the ocean. There's questions as to whether they even found him or not, or that he was taken to an island. There's all kinds of theories, but again, right? We talk about the elites and who stands for who, and who rises up who, and who's in cahoots with who. So that's another interesting point. But I do want to draw your attention to this, where it says Biden will withdraw all U.S. forces from Afghanistan. The initial date was by September 11th, 2021. So again, it's like, why wait till that specific time? Exactly 20 years later, it's almost like a little bit of a slap in the face to the American people when there was no plan in place to do this. Now, of course, I don't believe in the left right paradigm. I do know that a lot of this is going to be blamed on Biden, but we have to also keep in mind that this was a deal that was made with Trump, actually, that was how this was actually put into place. And then Biden just was going to go forward with it. Again, on a logical level, you would think that any person with common sense might have a plan and not just withdraw, right, the troops when you know that there's how many years of tension there, and if there was this potential threat, right? So you would think that maybe you would start to get people out, get out citizens, get out, people, European American and American citizens, or other people who had people that were there, if you knew that this was going to happen. But the idea, again, is to create order out of chaos, is to create conflict. Okay. Now, I thought that this was really interesting that only a couple weeks ago, before this, we see that Cuomo resigns amid scandals, ending decade-long run in disgrace, is what it says here. But what I thought was interesting about this, if you don't know who Governor Andrew Cuomo is, he was the governor of New York. There were some sexual allegations taking place prior to this, in the weeks leading up to his resignation. Now, I think it's really strange, right? Coming up on the 20 years of 9/11, we have the Taliban apparently rising to power after US troops leave after 20 years. And now we're seeing also at the same time, the governor of the exact place that was bombed 20 years ago, New York, is now stepping down, right? There's the elites are making a statement about handing of power, right? That's the first thing. But I also think that this has a very big role to play in some of the things that we're seeing concerning this pandemic. And so, if you didn't know this already, besides some of the other really strict mandates that the US have put into play, we now see that there are these vaccine passports that they're going forward with, where in order to be able to go to restaurants, bakeries, coffee shops, catering halls, cafeterias, event spaces, banquet rooms, bars and nightclubs, dining spaces, in grocery stores, fast food restaurants, movie, performing arts theaters, music, concert venues, museums, exhibition halls and galleries, aquariums, zoos, sports arenas, stadiums, convention centers, bowling alleys, pool halls, game centers, arcades, gym, fitness centers, workout centers, dance studios, casinos, and adult entertainment videos or venues. If you want to go to any of those places, you must be vaccinated in New York. Again, very strict mandates. I can tell you, as somebody who is firsthand aware. If you want to work in New York, another thing is that if you're not going to if you want to be a new hire, you must show proof of vaccination. If you're not a new hire and you are just coming, you're going to have to get tested every week as a way to push people into getting the jab. So that's an important point as well. Now, my thought in this, I want you to hold this picture in your mind, because here's what the passport looks like. Okay, so you're supposed to put a picture of your ID to identify you as a human that also has this the jab, right? And how many days since your last test. So this is supposed to be kind of a frontal view of what that looks like. Now, again, why do all this at the same time? Well, how trauma works, it has to do with like a recall of traumatic events. They want you to relive the fear of those events. And so this is obviously something very foreseen, is the coming Afghan refugee crisis. Now, they're saying that this is worse than what we saw happen in Vietnam in the overtake of Saigon. They're saying that this is worse than that. So if that is the case, we can suspect that there will be a call, especially for America, who played a huge role in this, to bring in and to open borders to refugees, which is going to create even more conflict. Okay, we can already foresee this as taking place. Now you're going to have the humanitarian issue, where it's like, okay, these are, and again, it's Hegelian dialectics. These are real people who are impacted. And as a follower of Jesus, we are called to help people like this. However, we have to also know that there is a plan behind it with the elite. And so you just pray and ask God how you can extend your hand to those. But I want you to also see this. Okay. Now, bringing up again the traumatic fears of what happened during 9/11 is also a way of segueing and pushing this yet again. Why? Because now there's going to be the question, well, what if these refugees bring, you know what, right? And then other people get sick and the rates and the rise goes up. Well, the only way to do that, here's their solution. Now we have this passport, right? You have to not only show yourself, but now you also have to show proof that you are free of this disease. I'm trying to really be careful with my words. Okay. But again, I want you to just see how this is all playing a part, because this is not just going to be New York that this is going to happen. You're going to see this push in Europe and other places, right? What other way? They're going to say, how do you know who is and is not sick? How do you know who is and is not a carrier? Well, they need to be jabbed. And on top of being jabbed, we need to make sure we are able to identify each individual as not being a potential member of the Taliban, which was the fear with Al Qaeda during 9/11, and what you see sociological terms rise up as Islamophobia. Okay, that's where that came from. All right. So I just wanted to put this into full view for you. Again, I hope I didn't go too long. I hope this video blessed you. Please, give it a thumbs up, share the video. That's how you beat the YouTube algorithm, is by sharing the video. Share it, share it, share it. I also appreciate hearing from you in the comments. I want to know what your thoughts are on this, and just make sure that we're keeping watch. The Bible does tell us in Matthew that you're going to hear of wars and rumors of wars, but don't be afraid, right? Because the end is not yet come. There's still so many things that are happening and are going to continue to take place before Jesus does eventually return. But for now, just stay strong, brothers and sisters. Be aware. Don't allow the enemy to deceive you and to lead you into fear, right? Also, stay focused on good things. Stay focused on God. Stay focused on his promises, his redemption. He says, when you see these things, also look up because your redemption is drawing near. So we want to be focused on the good and the redeeming of what God is going to do. But these videos are also so important because the enemy works in lack of knowledge and in confusion and in darkness. And so these videos are meant to shine light on what some of the things that are happening, to keep you aware, to keep you kind of, on your toes, like, hey, I do need to be keeping watch. The Bible tells us to keep watch because we don't know the day nor the hour. So keep watch, be aware. It only further confirms our faith and what we already believe to be true. So don't live in a place of fear, but know that your redemption is drawing nigh, and just continue to love people, to make disciples of all men, and to preach the message of the gospel. Go forth in love, peace, boldness, and perseverance to preach the message of the gospel. Shalom and God bless you.